Good morning, scholars. Today we are going to be doing our Monday, May 18th work in your packet, scholars. You can either use the new packet listed May 1st through the 21st, or the old packet. I believe the old packet should still have this information as well, parents. But if not, it's definitely in your new packet. Yep, your old packet does have this as well. So in either packet, we are going to be doing our practice test. This is the last thing that we will be doing for our Unit 8 First Grade Fiction Elements unit. After this, we will be completely done with this unit. And yeah, we'll be also done with our kindergarten year. You'll be able to enjoy your spring break and have fun and not have to do schoolwork. So before we jump into our practice test, which is what you'll need today, let's go ahead and review some of the things that we've learned that will help us be successful when we take our test. All right. One of the things that we learned about was our characters. Let's review what our characters are. Ready? The characters are the people or the animals the story is about. We also learned about setting. The setting is when and where the story takes place. We also learned that key details and main events are important pieces of information that must be included in a retell for the retell to make sense. So they have to be in there in order for the story to make sense. If we don't include them, it won't make sense. We also talked about the conflict. The conflict is the bad or sad thing or the problem that's happening in the story. It's what's not going well. We have a chant, ready? The conflict is the problem in the story. Conflict is the bad thing. But we also talked about the solution. And the solution is how the problem gets fixed. It goes like this. The solution is how the problem gets fixed. So the solution is a good thing. We also talked about what might cause the solution, what behavior might cause the solution. Remember when we read the story about Ruby the copycat? The problem was that she was copying everybody. The solution is that she stopped copying people. Why did she stop copying people? Well, she realized she was good at stuff too, and so that's why she stopped copying it. And then we learned about the moral. The moral of the story is the lesson that the author's trying to tell us. It's not always something that the author says, this is the moral, this is the lesson. He's not going to put it in words. We have to think about everything we heard and what our heart makes feel good, okay? A moral is something that makes your heart feel good. So after reading a story, you have to think about the good thing the author wants you to do. It's like when we read Never Say No to a Princess. She wasn't a very nice princess. She was bossy and she kind of yelled at people and she demanded things. And it wasn't until she said please and started using her manners that she was able to make friends and be happy. And so the moral of that lesson was, to have polite manners, to be kind, and the importance of friends. Friends can make us very happy. So those are all things that make our heart very good or feel very good. Or for example, in the book The Boy Cried Wolf, remember he kept saying a wolf was coming and kept tricking the town people, and the town people would get scared, and he was tricking them. There was no wolf. And then when the wolf did come, he called and they didn't come because they didn't believe him. Well, the moral was you should always tell the truth, and that's something else that makes our heart feel happy. Telling the truth is a good thing. It should make your heart feel good. So that's what the moral is. The moral is the lesson the author is trying to teach you. All right. Now that we have reviewed the key aspects of this unit, we're going to jump into our practice test. Now, scholars, our practice test has 3 different stories and questions that go with each story. What we're going to do today is we're going to use the first story called Chris Crosses the Street. It looks like this. And we're going to do questions 1 through 4. That's all we're going to do today. So for today's Monday, May 18th lesson, you just need Chris Crosses the Street story and questions 1 through 4. That's all you'll need. All right, let's go ahead and listen as Miss T reads Chris Crosses the Street so that we are able to answer the questions. Chris was walking with Grandpa. Let's have lunch, Grandpa said. There is a restaurant across the street. That sounds good, said Chris. He started to cross the street. Wait, cried his grandpa. You should never walk into the street without looking. You should hold my hand, too. But I did not hear any cars coming, said Chris. It is still dangerous to cross the street without looking both ways first, said Grandpa. I am sorry, said Chris. Grandpa took Chris's hand. They looked both ways. There were no cars coming. Together, they walked safely across the street. Scholars, let's go to question number 1. What is the major event of the story? Is it A, Grandpa reminded Chris to look both ways before crossing the street? If you think that's the major event, go ahead and circle it. Is it B, Grandpa suggests eating lunch? If you think that's the most important thing, go ahead and answer that or circle B. If you think it's C, Chris says he's sorry, go ahead and circle C. And if you think it's D, always apologize to your grandpa, go ahead and circle D. Remember, you're thinking about the major event in the story. What had to happen for the other stuff to make sense? Is it A, Grandpa reminded Chris to look both ways before crossing the street? B, Grandpa suggests eating lunch? C, Chris saying he's sorry? Or D, always apologizing to your grandpa? Which one makes sense for the story to be understood? Go ahead and circle your answer. Okay. So, although it is very, 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 very important that Grandpa reminded Chris to look both ways before crossing the street, that's not the major event in the story. Although it is very important to say sorry if you've done something wrong, like C suggests, that's not the major event in the story. And although it's a good idea to always apologize to your grandpa if you've done something wrong, that's not the major event. Scholars, in this instance, you should have circled B. If they never suggested eating lunch, the rest of the story wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense why Chris is crossing the street. It wouldn't make sense why Grandpa was telling him, you should look both ways and hold my hand. So the major event that happened first is that they suggest going to eat lunch. That's what makes sense. That explains why they're crossing the street. That explains why they're walking somewhere. Let's go to number 2. What is the main lesson in Chris Crosses the Street? What do you think the author is trying to teach you? Listen again to the story. Chris was walking with Grandpa. Let's have lunch, Grandpa said. There is a restaurant across the street. That sounds good, said Chris. He started across the street. Wait, cried his grandpa. You should never walk into the street without looking. You should hold my hand, too. But I did not hear any cars coming, said Chris. It is still dangerous to cross the street without looking both ways first, said Grandpa replied. I am sorry, said Chris. Grandpa took Chris's hand. They looked both ways. There were no cars coming. Together, they walked safely across the street. Scholars, what do you think the author is trying to teach you? Do you think he's trying to teach you A, do not talk to strangers? B, always hold your grandpa's hand when you're away from home? Or C, to look for cars before you cross any streets? What is the lesson the author is trying to teach you? Go ahead and circle A if you think it's do not talk to strangers. Circle B if you think it's always hold your grandpa's hand when you're away from home. Or C, go ahead and circle C if it's look for cars before you cross the street. Think about what the author might be trying to teach you and circle your answer. Okay. Although not talking to strangers is a very important lesson, that's not what was talked about in the story. We didn't hear Chris talking to any strangers. It was just Chris and his grandpa. So we know That's not A. Talking to strangers is a good lesson to know, but that's not the main lesson in the story. B, always holding your grandpa's hand when you're away from home. That might be a good thing to do. It helps you to stay safe, but that's not the lesson. If you circled C, look for cars before you cross a street, that's absolutely right. Scholars, the main lesson that the author is trying to teach you is that it's important that you look for cars both ways before you cross the street ever. And you should probably hold an adult's hand or have somebody much bigger than you before you cross the street. But the main lesson in this one is, you need to look for cars before you cross the street. It's very important to stay safe. And cars can sometimes be going so fast or come out of nowhere. So it's important that you stay safe. Let's go to number 3. Where were Chris and his grandpa walking to? This one's a fill in the answer. So it says Chris and grandpa were walking to, Listen again to the first few lines to see if you can find the answer of where Chris and grandpa are walking. Chris was walking with grandpa. Let's have lunch. There is a restaurant across the street. Where were Chris and his grandpa walking to? Chris and his grandpa are walking to, Go ahead and write your answer on the line, sounding out your sounds. Okay, come back to Miss T. So scholars, you could have said they were walking to lunch. You could have said they were walking to a restaurant. Both answers are okay. For this case, I'm going to do lunch because it's shorter and it's less sounds in restaurant, but we can do both. If you wrote lunch, let's sound it out. L, U, N, ch. Okay, now remember, we're all at different places. So if you only got the L and the U, way to go. If you only got the L and the CH, great. If you only got the L, that's perfect. We are all in different places. Now, if you wrote restaurant, let's sound that out to see if you got some of those sounds right. R, E, S, T, surf, that's UR, A, N, T. Good. Now, again, if you only got R and T, way to go. If you got R and E, perfect. If you just got R, that is great. If you got all of it, wonderful. It doesn't matter if you got it 100% right. It matters that you tried and that you got some of the sounds, scholars. You need to be pushing yourself to make sure you're getting some of those sounds on the paper. The only way you're ever going to get better at your writing and your reading is if you push yourself, because you are responsible for your learning. Remember, you don't have to write lunch and restaurant. You only had to write one. We just did both words in case you wrote restaurant or in case you did lunch, but you don't have to write both. And parents, again, you'll notice that we are phonetically spelling the word restaurant, so we are missing a couple letters. That is okay as well. Let's go to number 4. Number 4, how did Grandpa feel when Chris did not look both ways? Was his Grandpa A, mad? Was his Grandpa B, happy? Was his Grandpa C, worried? Or was his Grandpa D, excited? Look at your paper. We're going to talk about this one before you choose your answer. Okay, we're going to start right here. Go down 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. We are on the 4th line. Ready? Wait! Cried Grandpa. You should never walk into the street without looking. You should hold my hand too. Do you think Grandpa was A, mad, B, happy, C, worried, or D, excited? Go ahead and choose your answer. Okay, come back to Miss T. Scholars, this question can be a little difficult because There are probably two answers that make sense. Let's talk about the answers that don't make sense. Do you think be happy makes sense? Do you think Grandpa was very happy that he walked across the street? Probably not. Do you think that he was excited that Chris was walking across the street? No. Remember, words like happy and excited are positive feelings. Typically, we wouldn't feel those if somebody had done something wrong or there was a problem. So I don't think he's feeling happy or excited. Now, let's look at the letter A. A says that he's mad. Do you think maybe Grandpa was mad that Chris walked into the street and wasn't being safe? That kind of makes sense because I know sometimes when my daughters were little and they would walk in the street without being safe, I would get a little mad or frustrated because I want them to be safe. But I don't think his grandpa was mad, and let me explain why. C says worried. I think that Grandpa was more worried about Chris not looking both ways. And the reason why I think that is because we didn't hear that he yelled at Chris in the story. We didn't hear that Chris got in trouble. We didn't hear anything. We also heard that Grandpa said, wait. Okay, wait means he's kind of telling him, stop, hold on. Grandpa was worried that Chris was crossing the street. But scholars, if you chose A, mad, or C, worried, either one I think are fine for today. Both are appropriate answers. I think Grandpa could have been mad that he was crossing the street unsafe, but I also think that Grandpa was worried about Chris and took the time to explain why you shouldn't do it because he's worried that Chris might get hurt. Again, both A or C, you don't have to do both, were appropriate answers for number 4. Scholars, we are out of time for today, so we are going to take our 2 sheets, we're going to tuck them away, and we are not going to go on because tomorrow, Tuesday, we will do the next story on our practice test. I hope you have a wonderful, happy Monday. Remember, when you read any books today or watch any stories or videos, think if you can find the characters. Think if you can find the setting. Think if you can find how they feel or what might be happening in the story. I hope you have a wonderful Monday, and I will see you for Tuesday. Bye, dears.